Hey, Mike with Nerd Problems Gaming here, the channel where we go through the good and bad of everything nerdy to make sure you spend your time on the best of the best. In today's video, we'll be going through the top 10 best RPGs for NES. So let's get into it. So a couple things before we jump into the list. Some of these gameplay mechanics might seem a little dated at this point, but at the same time, a lot of these games laid the foundation for future RPGs to come and really established my love for RPGs in general. And some of these games still stand as some of my favorite video games of all time. Now the list itself is a top 10, but they aren't necessarily in a specific order per se, where they're all great games. And so it's kind of hard for me to necessarily rank them in a specific order, but these are 10 of my favorite RPGs on the NES. Also, a couple of these games weren't necessarily released in the US, but for many of these, there have been later releases or patches where you are able to play an English version on later systems or through emulation to get that original experience. But with that said, let's jump into the top 10. So number 1 on the list is Mother, and this game was originally only released in Japan, but like I said, you can find it through emulation, and they did a later port on the Game Boy Advance that was kind of a combination of both Mother and Mother 2 or Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. And this is a very similar game to the Super Nintendo sequel, Earthbound. And so this series in general is kind of quirky and doesn't necessarily take itself too seriously, where the game you play as the protagonist, Ninten, who is a young boy, and as you start up the game, there's weird paranormal activity going on and a poltergeist is attacking his house. And so once you go and save your family from this, you learn from your father that your grandfather also did some investigation on paranormal activities like this, and then you go out on a journey through this game, teaming up with other various characters that have psychic abilities to take on an oncoming alien threat. So this game is a turn-based RPG that features random encounters in a first-person perspective, so it's kind of similar to the Dragon Quest series in that respect. But like I said, instead of being fantasy-based, it's kind of set in a modern-day setting during the 80s, and then again, you use more realistic items like baseball bats and toy weapons to defeat enemies. A lot of the enemies too are pretty funny, where you're fighting down rednecks or hippies or inanimate objects come to life. And so you go on this quirky adventure to save the world as these heroes. And so again, it's a lot of fun. It's maybe not necessarily as good as the sequel Earthbound, but it's cool to play through this origin story of the Mother series on the NES. The next game on the list is Final Fantasy II. And so this created kind of a lot of confusion when I was growing up, where Final Fantasy II was actually for the Super Nintendo, but that was really Final Fantasy IV in the series. And so in this game, you play as 4 heroes whose parents were brutally murdered by an evil empire that's trying to take over the world. And so throughout this game, you get separated from one of the heroes in the beginning. And so then as you play through the story, various other heroes kind of fill that space as the 4th hero throughout the game. And why I like this game so much is the gameplay itself is very addicting within the level up mechanic system. And so with traditional Final Fantasy games, usually you gain experience and then you hit so much and then you'll level up and your abilities will improve. And then again, usually there's various different classes that you can play as, be it like a mage or a warrior or a thief, different things like that. What's different with this game is that all of the characters can really use any ability they want. They can equip any weapon, they can use any spell, and then their stats are actually based on how you use the character. So for example, if you use swords a lot, your sword ability is going to improve. If you use the fire spell a lot, the fire spell is going to improve. And so I thought this was a really cool mechanic, and you can actually kind of game the system to some extent too, where you can attack your own characters. So when you're just starting out early in the game, you can attack your own team to deplete their HP and really level up your hit points and stamina very quickly, improving your defense, improving your attack as well. And so this can give you a neat way to kind of, again, like I said, game the system, where you can use your spells on your own characters to level them up faster. You can deplete your magic all in one battle to then level up your MP because you used so much in the previous fight. And so, like I said, it's very addicting, and I like that aspect of the game, and it's kind of a unique level up mechanic that you don't really see until many years later in kind of the RPG industry. But I definitely think it's a game worth checking out. And they also did a really great remake of this NES version for the Game Boy Advance, which has some additional features they add into the game. and kind of an after storyline plot as well. So if you can't find a translated version for the NES, I'd recommend checking out that Game Boy Advance version as well. The next game on the list is Dragon Quest IV, or Dragon Warrior 4 as it came out here in the US. And so this game is pretty cool where it's broken down into different chapters that are focused on a specific character in the storyline. And so you kind of learn about their background, what got them to the point that they're at, where they meet up with the main hero protagonist in the story. And so it's kind of a unique way to come at the game, where instead of having everybody all at once, you go through each individual character's story and they all kind of intertwine together later on in the game. And so I thought that was really cool within the story. And then also it introduces a caravan aspect where you can swap party members in and out the further you get in the game. So if you like turn-based RPGs, which you probably do if you're watching this video, I would recommend checking out Dragon Quest IV, or again, Dragon Warrior 4 on the NES. The next game on the list is Dragon Quest III, or Dragon Warrior 3 as it came out on the NES. And so what's cool about the first 3 Dragon Warrior games is that they're all intertwined and they all take place in the same game universe. And so Dragon Warrior 3 is actually the first chronologically, and so you take on the role of the hero of this game, whose goal is to defeat the evil fiend. And to help you on your journey, you can actually build out a team of characters. And so unlike Dragon Warrior 4, where they kind of have their own character and backstory, this game is a little bit more generic, where you have the main hero and then you can recruit players. And so this is neat, where you pick like their character class, you name them, you make them male or female, and then you build out your roster that way. But at the same time, as you level up these different characters, you can mix and match and swap them out by returning to town. So if you need to take on a tough boss or a challenging aspect of the game, you can switch out what party members you have to possibly make that task easier. So not only does it have a cool story, it has some cool advanced game mechanics where you can really customize your party how you want to. And I definitely recommend checking out this game, as it's one of the best RPGs on the NES. The next game on the list is River City Ransom. And so what's cool about this game is it's more of an action RPG beat 'em up than maybe a traditional turn-based RPG. So in this game you play as either Alex or Ryan, and you go on a quest to save Ryan's girlfriend who was kidnapped by local thugs and gangs. And so you're a couple of high school students going through the city, beating up thugs and villains, and the gameplay style is very similar to a Double Dragon type game. So like I said, it's one of the first beat 'em ups I played, but it was super cool that it also introduced RPG elements as well. So as you kill and beat up different villains, they drop money, and then there's different areas of the game where you can go shopping at different stores. So there's various restaurants, there's dojos where you can learn new moves, you can buy books or magazines that give you new abilities and power-ups as well. And so it's really cool where you might eat a croissant and it fills up your health or it heals your stamina, but then it also gives you permanent stat boosts for the rest of the game. So you don't necessarily have experience per se where you level up, but you gain money from beating enemies, which you can then translate into new food that boosts your stats or learning new abilities. And so it's a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend checking out this action RPG for the NES. The next game on the list is Final Fantasy III for the NES. And so this game is really cool. They did a remake for the Nintendo DS that came out several years later, but prior to that, there wasn't an English translation of this game unless you went through emulation. And while the DS remake is cool, I personally prefer the NES version. I like that graphic style better. I think the gameplay is a little bit more straightforward. The game has less jobs that you can tap into, but just overall, I like the NES version of the game a lot better. So if you can find a translated version of this game online, I definitely recommend playing it. And so the plot of the game, you take on the role of 4 orphans that are granted special powers and abilities by the crystals, and they set out on a journey to restore the world. And so what I really like about this game is the gameplay and job mechanic system. And so similar to the original Final Fantasy game, there's various different job classes that your characters can play as, but instead of picking them at the start of the game and keeping them for the rest of the game, as you encounter new crystals throughout the game, you'll be granted more job classes. And so your characters can mix and match the job that they are, depending on the given situation and what crystals you've unlocked. And so not only do your characters level up and get more powerful with their main level, they also can develop better skills for the various job classes as you play through them. On top of this, one thing that I really like about the game is it gives you the option to dual wield, so you can hold 2 different weapons at the same time for the characters. But like I said, I really like the aspect of the game where you're not necessarily locked into a specific class. So at some points of the game, you're transforming into a team of all magic users. Other points you get to have a variety in your party. And again, you can really just optimize your party based on the situation you're in within the game. And so it's a ton of fun. I like the story in the game, and it's one of my favorites on the NES. The next game on the list is Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon and the Sword of Light. And so again, this is another game that was originally just on the Famicom and wasn't really actually brought over to the NES, but they recently did a translated version that came out for a limited time on the Nintendo Switch. So if you managed to pick it up there, awesome. But if you didn't, you can find a translated version through emulation. And so this game is a tactical RPG that's similar to all the other Fire Emblem games that come forward from this game, but you take on the role of Marth as he leads his troops and army trying to defeat the evil kingdom and enemies he faces throughout the game. And so like I said, it's a tactical RPG that holds up surprisingly well on the NES. And so you'll play as various different characters that are different classes. So you've got soldiers, you've got archers, you've got Pegasus Knights, mages, and more. And each have their own movement abilities, weapons they can equip, spells, and more they can use through the game. And so when you encounter enemies, you'll jump into like a mini cutscene where they fight it out and damage each other. And again, it also has sort of a rock, paper, scissors mechanic to the game as well, where certain weapon types and abilities will be strong against others and weak against others. And so as you traverse the battlefield, there'll also be secret towns and conversations you can encounter that will give you hidden items and unravel more of the story as you play. The game is certainly tough as it features permadeath as well. So if a character dies, you lose them for the rest of the game, and they're not even a part of the story moving forward. So it definitely laid the groundwork for some of the future Fire Emblem games, which in my opinion is one of the best franchises in the RPG genre. So definitely check out this game if you can, as it's one of the best games on the NES. The next game on the list is Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, as it was released here in the US. And so this game laid the foundation as the first Dragon Warrior game in the series. It features some of the classic characters and monsters and music that you'll see throughout the rest of the Dragon Quest series. And you take on the role as a hero that's following in the legendary hero's footsteps to defeat the evil Dragon Lord. And so you'll go across the country, visiting various towns, saving princesses, finding magic items, and more to defeat the evil Dragon Lord. And so this is a pretty simplistic turn-based RPG where you'll just defeat enemies. It's a one-on-one battle, and the game can get a little bit grindy, but you're always progressing towards that next best item, piece of armor, or leveling up to improve your stats and unlock a new ability as you play. And so it's a lot of fun. It's very iconic. Sometimes some of the mechanics can be a little frustrating though, as you need to select talking to people, you need to select opening doors, using items, and it can get a little bit tedious that they've kind of worked out in future generations of RPGs. But even so, it's a great game. The music's awesome. I love the artwork, and it's one of the best RPGs on the NES. And it's definitely worth picking up and checking out. There are plenty of remakes of this game as well. So if you want to try out more clean versions of the game, maybe with souped up graphics, that is an option as well. But I still definitely enjoy the original NES version of the game. The next game on the list is Crystalis, and this is an action RPG that takes place after an apocalyptic nuclear war decimates the world. It's mutated the animals of the world and turned them into vicious monsters. And because of this nuclear war, it's almost like the people have gone back to the past and are living in medieval times. And so you play as a hero that awakens from a cryogenic sleep, and you're really the only hope left to defeat the evil Dragonian Empire. And so I really like the mechanics of the game. Like I said, it's an action RPG. And so you'll find various swords throughout the game, but then you'll also find different orbs and bracelets that you can equip that power up your sword even further. And so you can charge up your sword to unleash energy blasts that destroy walls, that unlock new areas for you. There's even a sword that will freeze water to allow you to walk over rivers and unlock new paths. And as you get the more powerful bracelets, you can rain lightning down on your enemies, release blizzards, and shoot out tornadoes and more. On top of that, the storyline is really cool, and it has a unique twist at the end as well. but you'll also pick up various items along the way that give you unique special abilities like jumping, gas masks to prevent being poisoned, and more. And so I think if you want to play a fun action RPG, this is one of the best games on the NES, and I highly recommend checking it out. All right, so number 1 on the list is the original Final Fantasy. And so I know I said I didn't necessarily put the games in order, but this one is number 1 for a reason, as it's pretty much my favorite video game of all time. I think I've had to have played through this game at least 20 times or more, as it's just super addicting and it has so much replay value to the game. So the game itself, you take on the role of 4 light warriors who are trying to restore the crystals to their former glory. And so because these crystals have weakened and darkened, the world has been thrown into chaos. Seas rage, the earth's rotting, fires are scourging the land, and your job as the light warriors is to restore the world to its former glory and defeat the evil fiends that are destroying the world. And so I really love the gameplay of this game because, again, you start off with the 4 light warriors, but each game is a totally different experience because as you start the game, you create your party from scratch. So you have a bunch of different job classes you can choose from. You can be fighters, you can be black mages, white mages, red mages, black belts, and thieves. And so you literally can create hundreds of combinations to play the game through. Do you want a heavy magic using team? You can do a red mage, a couple black mages, and a white mage. Do you want to be just all physical focused? So you're doing fighters and black belts. There's all kinds of different options you can play through this game. On top of that, while the game is more linear, it doesn't necessarily have to be, which I think is really cool. Now, traditionally, most people are going to go through and beat the game as it was intended, going from the earth crystal to the fire crystal to the water crystal, finally the wind crystal, and then again beating the game. But technically, when you know where stuff is in the game, you really only have to do the earth crystal first, and then you can go in any order you want once you know what you're doing. And so on top of having that massive replay value of choosing various different job classes when you start the game, you can sort of make it an open world feel and really take on the different challenges of restoring the crystals in almost any order you want, besides the first earth crystal. On top of that, something that's really cool is that when you get to a certain point in the game, you can upgrade your classes and your characters get even more powerful and unlock even more abilities where they can use higher level magic and equip different items that they previously weren't able to equip. And so like I said, I've played through this game so many times. It's still one of my favorites, and it's basically one of my favorite games of all time. And so I highly recommend checking out Final Fantasy for the NES, as it's one of the best RPGs there is. But let me know in the comments below if you agree with this list, if there's games I left out. Let me know how you'd rank some of these games. I'd love to chat about it with you more in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button as it really helps out the channel. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications to get the latest updates of new nerd videos we put out. If you'd like to help us support the channel, pick out content and more, become a patron of ours at nerdproblemsgaming.com/Patreon. And if you'd like to plug into our live streams and Let's Plays we do on the channel, you can follow us on Twitch at nerdproblemsgaming.com/Twitch. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you more soon.